There's a special kind of silence at 3 a.m., a stillness that wraps around the house like a blanket, broken only by the hum of the fridge and the soft breathing of my two K9s, Scout and Tango. That night, I had fallen asleep on the couch, an open dog training manual draped over my chest, and a half-empty mug of chamomile tea resting precariously on the armrest. I wasn't expecting war to break out on my front porch. The knock wasn't even a knock, it was a kick. A hard, bone-rattling thud that shook the door on its hinges. Scout's ears perked up first, then Tango's low growl rumbled through the living room like a warning siren. I sat bolt upright, heart hammering in my chest. Another kick. Louder this time. Then came the voice. I have a key. You're trespassing. This is an inspection. I didn't need to guess who it was. The shrill, self-righteous tone was unmistakable. Karen Whitmore. President of our HOA. And, apparently, now a nocturnal home invader. Now, let me be clear, I've had run-ins with Karen before. If there were Olympic medals for HOA micromanagement, she'd have a gold, a statue, and a sponsorship deal. But this? 3 a.m. and trying to force her way into my house with some kind of so-called master key. I grabbed my flashlight in one hand and the remote to the dog gate in the other. My dogs were trained for protection, but they also knew restraint. Scout was older, calm under pressure. Tango was the unpredictable one. If Karen broke through that door, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a headline. The door jiggled again. I crept closer, the adrenaline starting to sharpen my senses. Through the peephole, I could see the outline of a woman in a quilted robe and slippers, fumbling with a large key ring like she was trying to open a hotel room. That's when I turned on the porch light. Her face, when it lit up in the glare, was a mix of panic and fury. As if I had startled her by not being asleep while she tried to enter my home. "Ma'am, step away from the door," I said through the speaker system. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "You are trespassing. You're the trespasser," she screeched. "You never submitted your curtain patterns for approval, and I have a master key for emergencies." "This isn't an emergency, Karen. It is when you're in violation." Scout let out a sharp bark. Tango snarled, claws skittering across the hardwood as he lunged to the dog gate. That sound finally seemed to pierce Karen's delusion. Her eyes darted to the speaker. "You're threatening me with dogs now. I'll report this. I'll." The speaker clicked off. I was done talking. I called 911, not because I needed help, but because I wanted this documented. Karen had crossed a line, and I had a feeling she was going to lie about it before the sun even came up. The dispatcher was calm. "You say she was using a key?" "Correct," I said. "Tried multiple. None worked. Then she started kicking. I have footage." Scout and Tango were now pacing by the window, flanking the entry like two furry sentinels. I unlocked the side door and stepped onto the porch with the flashlight beaming ahead of me. Karen was gone. Only the deep scuff marks on the door remained, and a plastic key labeled "Maintenance Access Only" lying in the flower bed. What Karen didn't know, what she should have known, is that I'm not just another rule-breaking renter like she assumes. My name's Chris Delgado. 34. Former K9 handler for the Air Force. I bought this house 6 months ago, cash. No mortgage. No nonsense. Just me, my dogs, and a desire to live in peace. But peace wasn't on the HOA's agenda. Especially not Karen's. And this little stunt? It wasn't random. It was a test. But if she thought I'd roll over. She was about to learn what happens when you poke a man who trains dogs to protect. Because this was only the beginning. By the time the patrol car rolled into the cul-de-sac, Scout and Tango had calmed down. I, on the other hand, was wide awake, still barefoot on the porch with a steaming mug and a stack of documents I'd printed weeks ago, just in case. The officer stepped out slowly, flashlight in hand. "Sir, we received a call from this address, possible attempted break-in?" "That's correct," I said, pointing to the front door. "HOA President Karen Whitmore. Tried to enter my home using a key marked maintenance. When it didn't work, she started kicking." His brow arched. "At 3 a.m. I held up my phone. "I've got footage." We watched it together, Karen's robe flapping as she jammed one key after another into my lock, mumbling about curtain inspections and property violations. When she kicked the door, my porch cam picked up the exact timestamp, 3:08 a.m. "I can't arrest her for trespass," the officer said cautiously, "not unless she physically entered the home or damaged the door. But I'll file a report." "That's all I need for now," I said. "She's escalating." And she was. That morning, I pulled up the community group chat, which had been oddly quiet for weeks. But now, it was lighting up with messages from Karen. Reminder: all homeowners must submit updated security key access forms. Non-compliance may result in emergency action by the HOA board. Residents in violation of blind color codes, Section 6.3b, will be subject to inspections, day or night. Protecting our community requires vigilance. We thank our volunteers for their overnight patrols. Overnight patrols. That sent a chill down my spine. She wasn't just overreaching. She was organizing a civilian surveillance network. My mind went to that stack of papers I'd been sitting on, copies of HOA bylaws, property line disputes, and my own purchase agreement with a very specific clause: non-consent to unauthorized entry by HOA board members, including access to smart lock override. Karen was in violation. And this wasn't her first time doing it. I started asking around, subtle at first, chats with neighbors while walking Scout, offering coffee to the guy across the street who always trimmed his hedges at the same time every Saturday. The more I listened, the more stories came out. One woman, Tracy, said she'd caught Karen in her backyard, checking for mold near the hose spigot. Another man, Derek, had found Karen in his garage claiming she was counting paint cans to verify code-compliant colors. But the wildest came from Mrs. Ludlow, an 81-year-old who'd lived in the neighborhood since before the HOA even existed. She asked for a copy of my will, Mrs. Ludlow said, adjusting her glasses with a shaky hand. Said she was making sure homes didn't fall into the wrong hands. The wrong hands? That was it. I wasn't just going to fight this with reports and recordings. I was going to expose her. That night, I upgraded all my smart locks and rerouted my cameras to a backup cloud account. I wired the doorbell to send push alerts anytime motion occurred within 10 feet. I set Scout and Tango's routines to alert mode, a training protocol I'd built myself, non-aggressive unless a breach was detected. And then I waited. It didn't take long. 3 nights later, just after 2 a.m., the alert pinged on my phone. Front door. Movement detected. I tapped into the feed. There she was again. Karen. Robe. Key ring. And this time, she had someone with her, a man in a fleece jacket with the HOA logo stitched on the chest. He looked like he didn't want to be there, fidgeting and whispering something I couldn't hear. But Karen was focused. They tried the lock again. Then the side gate. Then my back door. Scout growled so hard I thought he might break the sound barrier. I triggered the floodlights, which snapped on like stadium beacons. Karen staggered backward, shielding her eyes. Her companion looked like he was about to vomit. The speaker clicked on. "You're being recorded," I said. Karen looked straight at the camera. And smiled. "HOA protocol," she called out. "You were warned." And just like that, she walked away, confident, unbothered. That's when I realized, she believed she was untouchable. She thought she owned this neighborhood. But she didn't know I'd been recording her for weeks. Didn't know I'd been building a file the size of a courtroom case. And she definitely didn't know that tomorrow morning, I'd be sitting down with a lawyer, and the local news. Because if she wanted to use power like a weapon, I was going to make sure it backfired spectacularly. I didn't go to work the next day. Instead, I drove downtown and stepped into the office of Leah Tran, an HOA and property law attorney with a reputation for dismantling power-hungry boards. I'd emailed her in advance, sent over my files, and when she greeted me, she didn't bother with small talk. "Let's get her," she said. We sat down in her corner office surrounded by walls of case folders and civil codes, but Leah didn't need to open a single one. She pointed at her laptop, where a thumbnail of Karen kicking my door glowed in 4K. Then she clicked play. "She thinks she's in the clear because she didn't enter the house," I said. "But she's attempted entry, twice, with force, at night, using a key that wasn't authorized." Leah nodded. "We're not going after a trespass charge." I raised an eyebrow. "Then what?" "We're going after abuse of position. Misuse of HOA funds. Unauthorized access to private property. Illegally distributed surveillance assignments." She leaned forward. I pulled some of the HOA's filings. "You're not the only one she's targeted, but you might be the first with hard evidence." That was the moment everything shifted. Leah drafted a cease and desist letter, a formal complaint for the city's HOA Oversight Committee, and even hinted at a class action lawsuit, if we could prove Karen had done this before. So, I went digging. And what I found, changed everything. Buried deep in the HOA's online archive was a security policy Karen had pushed through 18 months ago, an obscure clause labeled Section 8.7 Emergency Access Protocol. It gave board members limited access to community properties in case of regulatory violation emergencies. But here's the kicker, nobody else on the board had signed off on it. It had been inserted during a closed session, and the only digital signature was Karen's. I brought this to Leah. She smiled so slowly it was almost unnerving. "We've got her." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, interviews, and data pulls. Leah subpoenaed HOA spending records. I handed over every video clip, every email, every neighbor testimony I'd gathered. By Friday, we had a binder thicker than the HOA rulebook itself. But it wasn't just about legal filings anymore. This was personal. Because Karen? She doubled down. Friday night, while I was cooking dinner, the power flickered. Then died. At first, I thought it was the grid. Storm warnings had been going off all day. But when I stepped outside, my street was fully lit. Only my house had gone dark. Scout barked toward the side of the house. Tango was already pacing at the back. I grabbed my flashlight, walked the perimeter, and that's when I found it. The breaker box was wide open. The main switch had been flipped. Deliberately. And scratched into the metal cover, barely visible under the flashlight, were the words, "Submit or suffer." That was the last straw. I called Leah. She didn't hesitate. "We're going public." Saturday morning, I met with a local reporter who ran a blog on HOA overreach stories, the neighborhood watchdog. He interviewed me on camera, blurred my face, and featured my dogs front and center as the heroes they were. The headline went viral. HOA president targets veteran with dogs, power cuts, and 3 a.m. intrusions. Within hours, the comments flooded in. Hundreds of stories. People who had been fined for wind chimes. Others evicted for having tomato plants. But tucked deep in the comment thread was one that made my blood run cold. It read, "Karen Whitmore. Is that the same Karen who was fired from Ridgewood Oaks for staging fake mold inspections?" I reached out to the poster. Her name was Danny Morales. She was a former board member at Ridgewood Oaks, another HOA development about 40 miles away. She agreed to meet. We sat at a cafe, and she handed me a flash drive without saying a word. On it? Meeting notes. Security footage. Audio files. But the kicker? A resignation letter from Karen's old position. Not fired, but quietly removed after she allegedly used her board credentials to enter 3 different homes claiming she needed to verify compliance. Danny had tried to expose her, but Karen disappeared before the board could act. She showed up here 6 months later, I said, stunned. She always does, Danny replied. That night, I shared everything with Leah. She opened the flash drive and leaned back slowly. This isn't just a harassment case. This is a pattern. We filed a motion. The city assigned an investigator. Karen went quiet. No more emails. No more key attempts. She disappeared from the group chat. Her Lexus was absent from her driveway. The HOA newsletter skipped a week for the first time in 3 years. And then, a U-Haul showed up at her house. She was running. Or so we thought. Because 2 days later, I found a letter shoved into my mailbox with no stamp, no name. Typed in bold font. You think this is over? You've only just opened the door. I'd thought the story was over. Or at least winding down. Karen had vanished after the article went public, the neighborhood's group chat turned against her, and the cease and desist arrived on her doorstep like a courtly slap in the face. The U-Haul, the silence, the sudden withdrawal from her self-appointed throne, it all felt like an ending. Until that letter. You think this is over? You've only just opened the door. It wasn't signed, but it reeked of Karen. The paper was thick, the kind they use for fancy HOA mailings. It smelled faintly of lavender and fury. I handed it to Leah, who scanned it and calmly said, if she shows up again, we push for a protective order. But Karen didn't show up. Not at first. Her silence wasn't absence. It was strategy. Because while I was checking locks and reinforcing windows, Karen was doing what she did best, pulling strings in the dark. It started with something small. Scout's dog license renewal suddenly got flagged as pending a complaint. Then my property tax assessment showed an unusual spike, despite no home improvements or additions. And then, one morning, I found a neon pink notice taped to my fence. Pending code review, unauthorized security installations and animal handling structures. It was city issued. Legit. I called the number. They said the complaint had come from an anonymous neighborhood source. That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't acting as HOA president anymore, she was weaponizing the bureaucracy she once pretended to manage. Her crown was gone, but she'd found a new sword, systems. And worse? She wasn't acting alone. At 2:17 a.m. one Thursday night, my motion sensors lit up. Scout growled low, eyes locked on the front yard. Tango stood at the window, hackles raised. I pulled up the camera feed. 2 figures. Hoodies. One crouched at my fence, the other pacing near the side gate. I hit the speaker. This is private property. You're being recorded. Leave now. They bolted. But not before I saw the logo on the back of one hoodie. Oakside Property Services, a company run by Daniel Whitmore. Karen's son. I filed a report. Sent the footage to Leah. She didn't even blink. She's testing you, she said. Seeing how close she can get before you react. She sent her kid. Exactly. The next morning, the damage was clear. Someone had cut the bolts off my back fence. Just enough to make it look like a windstorm, but the clean marks told the truth. Worse? Scout's kennel gate had been unlatched. If I hadn't reinforced the hinges last week, he could have gotten out, and we lived near a road. Karen wasn't just playing games anymore. She was threatening the dogs. That's when I stopped playing defense. I activated the full home surveillance suite, 24/7 feed to cloud, redundant power backups, and thermal sensors across the yard. I sent the footage to 3 places, Leah, the HOA committee, and the Watchdog blog. Then I got to work building what Leah called the vault. Every infraction. Every video. Every neighbor statement. Every city complaint with timestamps proving tampering. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was preparing to take Karen down permanently. Because I wasn't alone anymore. See, after the blog article aired, 2 more residents came forward. Quiet folks. Retired couple on the corner and a single mom from 3 doors down. Both had stories about Karen using her key ring to inspect their houses when they weren't home. Both had been too afraid to speak until now. We met in my garage, the door closed, like we were planning a heist. But what we were planning was justice. The mom, Lily, had something no one else did, audio. A voicemail Karen left on her work phone after Lily installed a new AC unit. It's in the wrong place. If you don't fix it, I'll have no choice but to issue a Class B enforcement order. I will enter your yard. For safety. Lily hadn't deleted it. She'd been too scared. Now it was Exhibit A. Leah loved it. This, she said, is where we pivot. We compiled it all and filed an injunction, seeking to ban Karen from any property not her own within 100 feet of HOA borders. But we weren't stopping there. Leah had one more trick. Civil liability. Damages. Intentional emotional distress. And if it worked, Karen would be not just discredited, but disarmed. But Karen, somehow, got wind of it. And she decided to strike back. Hard. On a cold Sunday night, 10:41 p.m., while I was watching old training footage of Tango as a puppy, the power flickered again. Scout barked. Tango was already sprinting toward the yard. And then, boom. Not an explosion. A crash. I ran outside. My back fence, the same one they'd tampered with, was down. The bolts sheared clean off. And standing at the edge, her phone out, was Karen. Recording. Not yelling. Not kicking. Just filming. You see, she hissed. This is what happens when dangerous animals aren't secured. I couldn't breathe. What are you doing on my? The HOA board will see this, she said calmly. The new board. You're a liability, Chris. An untrained, unstable one. It ends tonight. And then she smiled. That same smile from 3 a.m. weeks ago. But this time. Scout stepped forward. Tango 2. Growling low. Controlled. Defensive. I stood between them and Karen, heart pounding, hand hovering over the command app on my phone. And for 1 second, just one, I thought she might dare to step closer. But then. A red light blinked on the porch. The security camera spotlight flashed on. And from the shadows, emerged Mrs. Ludlow. Holding up her iPad. I got the whole thing, she said. Karen froze. You set him up, Ludlow said. You tried to frame the dogs. You tampered with his gate. Karen didn't move. She turned slowly. And ran. Not walked. Ran. But this time. We were ready to chase her. Karen Whitmore's downfall didn't come with flashing sirens or handcuffs on the lawn. No, it came inside a conference room turned courtroom, at a long wooden table under the dull hum of fluorescent lights, where people who had once feared her sat side by side, eyes forward, spine straight. The hearing was held at the county's HOA Oversight Commission. Nothing dramatic, no live stream, no bailiffs, but it felt like the Super Bowl of neighborhood justice. At one end of the room, Karen, flanked by her lawyer and her son Daniel. She looked polished. Composed. Not a hair out of place. She wore her badge like it still meant something, clipped to a white blazer 2 shades too confident. At the other end, me, Leah Tran, Mrs. Ludlow, Lily, and 2 other residents who came forward in the final days before the hearing. One of them had lived next to Karen for 6 years. The other had secretly recorded HOA meetings where Karen suggested creative enforcement for rule violators. The chairperson opened the floor. "Mr. Delgado, please begin." I stood. Calm. Unshaken. I bought my house with the dream of peace, stability, and a place to raise my dogs in safety. Instead, I found a woman who tried to use her position to weaponize paranoia, who broke boundaries, manipulated policies, and treated our homes like they were her stage. I have no desire for revenge. Just accountability. Leah handed the commissioners our packet, 42 pages of evidence. Security footage. Emails. Code violations fabricated by Karen. And the crown jewel, video of her and Daniel at my fence at 2:17 a.m., hoodie logos glowing like admission of guilt. Karen didn't flinch. She didn't have to. Because her lawyer stood and said 2 words. Character witnesses. They called 3. The first was her friend Margaret from the Beautification Committee. She claimed Karen only acted out of care for the community. The second was a former HOA board member who admitted Karen could be overzealous, but never malicious. The third was a surprise. Detective Paul Meyerson. Retired. Karen had dated him years ago. His badge was gone, but his authority still clung to him like cologne. He claimed Karen had repeatedly been the target of harassment from residents who didn't respect structure. That's when Leah stood up, handed him a printed email, and asked, "Did you write this, detective?" He blinked. The email was from 2019. In it, he warned Karen not to use HOA funds for a personal investigation into a homeowner's vacation schedule. She'd replied, "It's worth it if we can catch them in violation." He folded. And Karen's expression cracked. Not much. Not visibly to the room. But I saw it. That tiny tick in her jaw. The unraveling. Then came the video. Mrs. Ludlow rolled in with her iPad like it was Excalibur. She played the footage of Karen at my fence, whispering into her phone, "Get the latch loose. I'll blame the dogs if they get out." The room went silent. Daniel looked away. Karen's lawyer asked for a recess. The chairperson said no. They deliberated for 45 minutes. In the meantime, Karen sat stone still, like a statue of her former self. When the commissioners returned, they didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. "Karen Whitmore, this commission finds you in violation of HOA code manipulation, illegal surveillance, and unauthorized property access. Effective immediately, you are removed from any and all leadership roles within Oakside Estates and barred from holding such a role in any HOA within this county for 5 years. Your actions have compromised community safety and trust." Karen didn't protest. Didn't cry. She just stood up, and walked out. No apology. No glance back. But that wasn't the real ending. That came 2 weeks later. I was on the porch, Scout curled at my feet, Tango chewing through the last of his favorite rope toy. The sky was clear. The air clean. No HOA drama. No pink notices. Just peace. That's when the mail came. A letter. No stamp. Typed. "I underestimated you. But the system won't always protect you. Watch your back." Scout barked when I read it. Tango perked up. And I laughed. Because by then, my neighbors were watching too. Lily waved from her porch. Mrs. Ludlow raised her glass of iced tea. Even Earl from 2 doors down held up a wrench like a victory flag. Karen had tried to own the neighborhood. Tried to turn law into weaponry, paranoia into governance, and power into privilege. But in the end, she lost to 2 dogs, a porch cam, and a bunch of neighbors who finally decided, enough is enough. As for Scout and Tango, they still sleep by the door. But now, it's not out of fear. It's pride. Because they helped protect what mattered most. Home.